Okay, so let us go through some part of review from what we learned yesterday. And before that, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining for the second session of Understanding Dharma. So if we just go back and look yesterday, what were some of the things that we learned? The first important point is that one should refer to standard scriptures like Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita when one is trying to speak about Dharma, because it is the component of uh, understanding Vedic knowledge. One must refer to the Vedic text so as to understand its meaning to the fullest. And second, we also saw that why there is a need to understand Dharma. So one important principle that we saw there is that struggle for existence is something everyone is subjected to. And an intelligent man thinks carefully, why is this happening? Why there exists a struggle for happiness? And what is the nature of this existence? What is the nature of the struggle? And why there is struggle for existence? What is this all about? What is the nature of all these things? And understanding this would help one to overcome the struggle that is undergoing. And thirdly, we also saw briefly about what is Dharma. And we saw that Dharma refers to the intrinsic characteristic of an object. So intrinsic characteristic, we meant that it is not a kind of a faith or a belief. Just like we saw the example of fire, which is associated with the characteristics of fire, of the heat and light is intrinsically associated with fire. Doesn't matter which country, who thinks, who does not think, it doesn't matter. It's absolute in the sense wherever there is fire, there is this intrinsic quality of heat and light. So these were some things that we looked yesterday, and then towards the end we briefly touched upon the subject of what is the intrinsic nature of the living entities. So we saw here the constitutional position of the living entity, that is, the nature of the living entity is spiritual, is not material, and therefore the intrinsic characteristic of the spirit soul is that of Sat Chit and Ananda, which is eternity, full of knowledge and bliss. And it is also, we have seen briefly yesterday, that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructs Srila Sanatana Goswami that Jivera Swarup hoy Krishna Nitya Das. So when Srila Sanatana Goswami asks, who am I? Why am I undergoing this threefold miseries of life? Then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that you as a spirit soul are not this body or the subtle mind, intelligence, or the false ego. Rather, you are a spiritual entity who is intimately connected with the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, and as the part connected with the whole, you have a natural constitutional duty of serving the whole. And this is where we saw yesterday that service is the intrinsic quality of every living entity. Every living entity is serving in one capacity or the other, someone or the other. And this service attitude is incomplete unless it is diverted to the complete whole. And therefore we saw that natural function of the living entity is to render service. And when this is employed to serve the Supreme Lord, that constitutes the highest perfection or the performance of the constitutional duty of the living entity. Now, why this is so important? Because when the living entity performs this constitutional duty of which one is supposed to perform, he immediately feels complete satisfaction and freedom from the struggle of material existence. So these were some of the things that we discussed yesterday. So today I will initially elaborate some of the things that we discussed yesterday in little more detail before we go further to see some more things. So yesterday when we saw about what is Dharma, we saw that there are different people having different conceptions of what is Dharma. Someone is thinking karma is Dharma, someone is thinking Hindu means Dharma, someone is thinking whatever the way of life that I'm leading, that is Dharma, and someone is thinking doing duties without attachment. Now, in each of these cases, the definition is not complete. Karma means actually fruitive activity. It's an activity where there's an individual gain of some sort of thing. I'm performing a certain activity so that I get some gain, personal gain. Now, Hindu is a faith-based belief. So today I can believe that I'm Hindu, tomorrow I can believe myself to be of some other religion. So there is no absoluteness to this also. Way of living can change. Today I'm a student, tomorrow I'm a working employee of a company, and day after tomorrow I'm a married person or something. And based on all these things, my way of living changes. And then one may call my dharma is ever changing. There is no fixed dharma for me. Then people may say, do your duties without attachment. But what sort of duty should one do? There are so many duties that one can perform. Which duty constitutes our real dharma? Which constitutes not our real dharma? And doing the right thing, again, what constitutes right? How do we know what is right? What is the real thing to be done? And then, as we saw yesterday briefly, that there is something known as manodharma. What is there in my mind, that is the right thing. Whatever is produced out of my mind is the real thing. And therefore, anything according to that, I work. So, we also see sometimes people consider my dharma is to work. So, I go to office every day and I work. Someone thinks taking care of my family is my real dharma. And someone else thinks my country, my nation, nationalism, patriotism, that is my real dharma. So in this way, people are considering various things to be their own dharma. So the first question that we'll be asking today is that why are there so many dharmas? What is the reason for having so many different dharmas? So it is important to note that we ascribe to various dharmas, these so-called dharmas, based upon our identification. So what we identify with, that gives us so many dharmas. So for example, as soon as I get enrolled in a school, now I become a student, and now I start following the rules and regulations and the duties that need to be performed towards the school. As soon as I identify myself going to work under someone in a company, now I identify myself being an employee of this company, and that identification gives me so many new duties, new dharmas. Oh, I should not go anywhere during weekdays. I should make myself available to follow the rules and the dictations of my boss. Or someone may think even more important is my family. So I need to spend my whole of evening with my family, the summer with my family. So now, until he was married and he had children, he was not having this dharma, but now he is identifying himself closely associated with his family now, and he thinks that there are so many duties that I need to perform in relationship with my family. Or someone identifies himself that I am born in this country, and therefore this identification is very important. I should make my country proud. Republic Day is coming, I will do something. Independence Day is going to come, I will do some more things. So his thought process, because of identifying himself being an Indian or some other American or some other form of nationalism, he is thinking there are so many duties to be performed in this direction. Now, this identification is a very, very important principle as what do we identify with. So, as we were also seeing yesterday, Ke Ami, who am I? Until unless we do not identify this thing very clearly, we will have so many dharmas which are which are coming either because of bodily relationships or mental thought processes or some other sort of intellectual thinking. So, therefore, it is very important to recognize what is my real self. Until unless one does not recognize one's real self, one will not recognize the duties of the real self. So, let us take an example. Let's say there is a child in a school and he starts acting like a teacher. Let's say the teacher has not come to the class, and let's say the child begins to act like the teacher and trying to control the other teacher, the other students in the class. So what happens? Now, this is the unnatural position of the student, that he is not qualified to be a teacher, but he is trying to act. As soon as the real teacher is, the student will be punished. And neither the other students may pay as much attention because they recognize that this student is actually not the real teacher. And also, by artificially enacting a role or a duty of someone else or something that we are not, we do not either find complete we do not find completeness. And therefore, people are changing from one position to another position in their different bodily conceptions to find some sort of satisfaction or some sort of identification of what is my true duty. Now, the first point that I'm trying to bring in here is that until and unless one does not recognize one's true self, one will be doing different sorts of duties which are not his true duties and which does not lead to a specific result. And a result which Dharma is supposed to lead one towards to. Although we discussed briefly yesterday, let me just share a specific verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, which talks in detail about what is this goal of Dharma. What is that Dharma is meant for? So this verse, 1.2.9 from Srimad Bhagavatam, is a very important verse. And here it says, Dharmasya hi apavargasya nardho ardhaya upakalpate nardhasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smritaha. So this verse is saying that dharmasya hi apavargasya. So here it is defining what is dharma is actually meant for. The real dharma is actually meant for ultimate liberation. So there is specific meaning behind why one should follow dharma, the real dharma that we are talking about. The real dharma leads one towards ultimate liberation. Nardho ardhaya upakalpate. They should never be utilized for material gain. Nardhasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smritaha. And furthermore, it's being said that one who is engaged in that ultimate occupational service should never use material gain to cultivate sense gratification. So here are three important points to keep in mind. First, that dharma is meant for ultimate liberation. So the question that we need to ask that yes, there are so many different dharmas, but the question is, are these dharmas leading towards the ultimate liberation? Are they freeing me from the threefold miseries, from the struggle of existence? If not, then that is not the highest dharma. That is not the intended purpose of real dharma that we are actually supposed to follow. And second thing, it is being said that any of the occupational duty that we are engaging in should not be performed for material gain. So usually in this material world, the material gain is the primary reason for anyone to act. But Prabhupada mentions just like a deceased man trying to enjoy. In this material world, one is constantly bombarded with threefold miseries, and therefore one is not in one's natural original position. As we saw even in today's Bhagavatam class, one is not in one's normal condition of life. And therefore, if one is trying to prolong his existence in this condition of life and hoping that he will find some enjoyment there, that is not true enjoyment. And therefore, one must be very conscious that whatever endeavors that I am undertaking, are they meaning or helping towards the ultimate goal of life or not? Or they are filled with material ambitions. And furthermore, it is being said, those who are engaged in the highest occupational duty, even they may get some material gain, but it is being said they should not utilize that for cultivating sense gratification. So even if you are on the highest path, if you are following the highest dharma, there is a possibility of getting name, fame, some wealth. All these things are possible, but one must be cautious and conscious not to use that for cultivating sense gratification, rather engage those material gain again in the service of the Absolute. So this is a very important principle, and maybe we can look at the next verse also. So the question comes, okay, if I'm not supposed to have material gain, then how will I lead my life? How will I take care of my family? So Prabhupada uses this verse, and in a conversation in a lecture, Prabhupada gives a wonderful example. So let's look at this verse and then look at the example where Prabhupada is explaining. Someone asked Prabhupada, how can we live our life if we are not to have material gain? So this is a nice verse which says, Kamasya nindriya pritir labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jignasa nardho yash cheha karma bhihi. So this verse is talking about that life's desires should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's work. So this verse is saying that how much of a material gain one should have. So it is saying here that one should not endeavor or desire to have sense gratification. That's not the goal. That's not why one should earn. That's not why one should have material accumulation. But one should have, or one can desire, only a healthy life or self-preservation. So Prabhupada gives an example in the lecture. Prabhupada says, yes, you need to eat something. Yes, you need to sleep and need a space. Yes, that's all right. But if you say, I want money to go to a movie theater in Mumbai, I want to do something else, I want to go and visit some other place and do something else. So now, what is beyond the basic requirements of a healthy life and self-preservation that constitutes sense gratification? And Prabhupada explains that the real purpose of life is to realize the absolute truth, and that should be the goal of one's life, and not to accumulate more and more material gain beyond the basic necessities to lead a healthy life. So this principle is very important, and even in our usual life we encounter various struggles between two dharmas. Imagine someone very close, someone who is related to us very closely is not well. So even though we may have so many other responsibilities, we may give it up and go and try to meet that person and see, oh, you have been so nice. You have done so much for me. Let me see, how are you? Perhaps you're in the end stages of life. So why do we choose one over another dharma? Because this is always within our life. We encounter, sometimes the family requires demand, sometimes the office requires demand. So we always make a change or some sort of a hierarchy of one over another. Usually people do this hierarchy over what gives one material gain, what makes them feel good. But here Srimad Bhagavatam is mentioning what should be the criteria of identifying what is my ultimate dharma and what all other dharmas are meant to do. So my ultimate dharma one should fix, that is to realize the absolute. Here it's being said, Jivasya Tattva Jignasa, to inquire about the absolute truth. What is the ultimate truth? What is my relationship with that absolute truth? And how am I supposed to engage in relation to that absolute truth? So this knowledge is known as Sambandha Jnana, Abhidaya Jnana and Prayojana Jnana. That means when one understands one's relationship with the supreme absolute truth, that is known as the Sambandha Jnana. And when one realizes that there is a relationship between the supreme absolute truth and the living entity, then the next step begins as what is my responsibility in this relationship? What is my duty in this relationship? How am I supposed to act in this relationship? And that constitutes the second step. And the third step is known as the prayojana, or what is that I'm supposed to achieve in this relationship? What process that I take in this method to achieve that the highest perfection of this relationship takes place. So the point here is that we must look from the perspective of Srimad Bhagavatam, decide what is our prime dharma. And as we saw yesterday, the dharma of the living entity is to be a servant of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Now, why is this so important? What happens if one doesn't do that? So, it is important to recognize that the living entity can associate either with matter or with the Supreme Lord, who is all spiritual. Now, when one associates one's duties so as to acquire some material gain or exploit some material nature or make some material gain only, the living entity which is spiritual in nature, still finds incompleteness. Because as we saw yesterday, that the existence of material nature is different from the existence of the living entity. The quality or the nature of the existence of the living entity is spiritual, whereas the nature of existence of the material world is opposite of that spirit. And therefore, even though there is a lot of material gain by performing material dharma or having many material resources, name, fame, and so on and so forth, still people find incompleteness. That is because of incompatibility between the nature of the living entity and the material possessions or the material nature. On the other hand, when the living entity associates in service of the Supreme Lord, then just like a part and parcel, just like when the hand serves the body, the hand gets nourished and so does the body. So this constitutional position of the hand's duty to serve the body and thereby getting nourished itself is a similar analogy that we can apply in our life, that we are part of the Supreme Lord when we engage in service to the Supreme Lord, and then we associate, we purify our true nature. So we are pure Sat, Chit and Ananda. That's our pure constitutional position. But when we come in contact with the matter and engage in material activities, then our pure Sat, Chit and Ananda is contaminated. But when we again engage in our true dharma, what happens is that our true nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda becomes revived. because of the association with the Supreme Sat, Chit and Ananda, that is the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And this results in completeness of the living entity. So it is important to recognize that if we want the perfection of life, if we want ourselves to be pure in consciousness, to be pure in our nature, we need to associate with the Supreme Lord. We need to engage in the service of the Supreme Lord. That is our true intrinsic dharma. It is not extrinsic to us, it is intrinsic to us. And anyone who engages in this intrinsic activity can immediately see that difference, can immediately see that change. And some others may say, no, I will find service in some other living entity. So this is another kind of tendency that people also have, that my family or some other extended family, I will engage in the service of them. But actually, there is a distinction between the Supreme Lord and the living entity. The Supreme Lord is complete in himself, and he is the reservoir of pleasure and love and knowledge and unlimited qualities. Whereas the living entity, who is also bound, who is also incomplete in one's own self, cannot provide completeness to another living entity. And usually in the material world, the living entities are conditioned by themselves, and therefore engaging in their service does not help one attain to the highest perfection of the dharma, that is to attain ultimate liberation. Rather, in the material world, serving another living entity does not bring satisfaction to the another living entity, neither to the living entity who is serving the other living entity. And therefore there is always a conflict. There is always some sort of issue or the other, disagreement, fight, and so on and so forth, and disappointments and so on and so forth. Although there is some sort of appearance of joy, pleasure and happiness and things, but they are always mixed with the opposite of all those things. And therefore a conception that by serving another person, Manav Seva, I will attain all perfection. So taking away the Supreme Lord and just engaging in some other form of Manav Seva or some other Seva is not the intrinsic nature of the living entity. When one does the Madhava Seva, the service of the Supreme Lord, naturally the living entities service of the living entities is naturally included. As one develops love for the Supreme Lord, naturally the devotee develops love towards all other living entities, and by rendering service to the Supreme Lord, one is doing the highest service even to other living entities. Or sometimes people think, as we already saw before, that there are different types of isms: socialism, communism, nationalism, and so on and so forth. These kinds of service will enhance the quality of life of many others, or some sort of a thinking. This is also all incomplete. This is not also completely true, and people get frustrated. And today people call themselves to be professional activists. That means they do not want a solution to the problem. They want problem to continue and appear that they are doing some service. But actually these are all incomplete things which do not lead to the complete satisfaction of the soul. So it is very important to recognize that there is the highest dharma of life, that each individual has to revive one's original consciousness, his completeness in terms of complete satisfaction, freedom from anxiety, and freedom from the struggle of existence. Now, the real dharma is meant to achieve all these three things. And how does that happen? So, there is the principle of Yuga Dharma. So, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared 500 years ago to establish that dharma by which the living entity can attain the highest goal of dharma, that is the ultimate liberation, the ultimate perfection of life. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu inaugurated this movement of Sankirtana. And Sankirtana Yajna is considered to be the Yuga Dharma, the dharma for this age. So if anyone is desiring the ultimate perfection of life, one has to follow in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has recommended that Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, kalau nasti eva nasti, eva nasti, eva gatiranyatha. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that if one wants the highest perfection of self-realization and establishing one's loving relationship with the Supreme Lord, the most recommended process in this age of Kali Yuga is to chant the name of the Lord Hari, or chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, by enacting this process, one is naturally situated in one's constitutional position and rendering service to the Supreme Lord. And this simple process, if one disciplines oneself in executing this simple process of chanting and hearing, if one consistently does this, one can experience completeness, one can also experience one's true spiritual nature. And as we saw, there are different conflicts in this material world of so many duties that we need to perform, and usually it is very difficult to perform the highest dharma, because when you're performing that, it's difficult, you do not have any time. It requires a lot of austerity, struggle, or lot of time and energy to execute that ultimate dharma. But by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this has been simplified, and even further simplified by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, that if one chants 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra every day and follow the 4 regulative principles, that constitutes the highest dharma. So if one takes to this process of executing 16 rounds of chanting and 4 regulative principles, that will lead one to the ultimate perfection of life. Now this constitutes only 2 hours of a day, and rest of the day one has got even to perform the secondary activities which are meant to support the most primary activity, the Sankirtana, the chanting. One can go to work for 8 hours and bring back the results to further one's devotional life, to further support the Sankirtana movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to further propagate the message and the books of Srila Prabhupada. So if one can mold one's life in such a way that one is centering one's life around chanting, rendering service to the movement of Srila Prabhupada, and then whatever duties one has got, if one can also execute them well enough with the intent to support the most ultimate important duty of chanting, that itself will lead one to the highest perfection in this age. So if one keeps in mind the simple principle of to recognize that there is a Yuga Dharma. Yuga Dharma means it is intrinsic to this age. To concoct that there is a way, there is some other shortcut, or there is some other means by which one can attain the ultimate perfection, is an illusion. Because the Lord specifically appears so as to provide that sublime path which is practical and easy to follow in this age, especially when we are distracted and lost in so many other things of life. So I would like to conclude so this section by saying that one must recognize the Yuga Dharma, and if one practices the Yuga Dharma of this age, one can attain the perfection of life. That is the ultimate liberation from the material existence. Apart from this, I would just want to emphasize on 2 more things before we end, is that Prabhupada also explains the meaning of word dharma as religion in some places. So this is another interesting point to note, that sometimes people think religion as a kind of faith, a kind of belief. But when Prabhupada is translating this word dharma as religion in certain places, Prabhupada is meaning something even more deeper. And here it is said that so Srila Prabhupada indicates that he uses this particular translation for convenience and for want of a better English term. So because there is no equivalent, exact single word equivalent for dharma, Prabhupada is using this term, and he expresses dissatisfaction with a translation that could be misleading. So Prabhupada is translating as religion because there is no other better word, but then Prabhupada also explains what he thinks of this meaning of religion is in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada says that the word religion conveys the idea of faith, and faith may change. If a person's religion can change, then it is not eternal but temporary and therefore material. Thus, in his introduction to the Gita, he cautions a reader that dharma translated as religion is intended to mean truly spiritual religion, which is eternal and changeless. So, as we see, even in Bhagavad Gita, when Lord defines what is yoga, the science of establishing one's relationship with the Supreme Lord, that science is said to be avyayam, eternal and changeless. Similarly, when Prabhupada is translating the word dharma as religion, Prabhupada is not meaning a man-made, concocted, or some sort of a material religion. Rather, Prabhupada is meaning the true eternal religion, the Bhagavata Dharma, the Dharma of the living entity to perform in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. And that's what Prabhupada is meaning when he's translating the word dharma as religion. So this is another important aspect to note when dharma is being translated. There are two important more meanings to what the word dharma means. So the word dharma also comes in Purusharthas, where dharma, artha, kama, moksha. The word dharma there is not exactly the dharma what as we discussed yesterday. Srila Prabhupada translates the word dharma there as religiosity or sometimes material religiosity, in the sense certain pious activities or certain religious activities are performed for a certain material gain. So Prabhupada distinctly defines the word dharma there in the context of what it means. So it is also important to recognize that that dharma and the dharma that Srila Prabhupada is defining in ontological sense or in a broader sense is different. And lastly, there is also the understanding of dharma in terms of varnashrama dharma. So varnashrama dharma means the division of human society in four varnas, that is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra, and the four ashramas, that is Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyasi. So usually people also have various misconceptions about what this varnashrama dharma is. So Srila Prabhupada wonderfully explains, one devotee once asked Srila Prabhupada, in what category do we fall of the varnashrama dharma? So Prabhupada says, we do not fall in any of the categories, we are above them. So Prabhupada further explains that in the material world there are three modes of material nature, and each is influenced by different modes. And based upon these modes, the influence of different modes of material nature, on the material platform there are these divisions of Brahmana, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. So on a material platform, based upon the modes of material nature one has acquired, one has certain guna and karma, one has a certain tendency or liking towards certain work, and therefore one may perform such kind of work, and this is all to be done with the Supreme Lord being at the center. So the Varnashrama society is basically a Daivi Varnashrama society. That means that everyone is performing one's activities, although it's in a material plane, but the center of all of them is the Supreme Lord, is eventually serving the Supreme Lord in their own capacity. So this is another way of making progress in one's life, and therefore people sometimes think that, oh, I am following my dharma of my duty of working as Kshatriya or as a Brahmana or so on and so forth. That is all there, but even more important and fundamental dharma is the Bhagavad Dharma, is the dharma in relationship with the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Father, that we have to do, perform a certain duty, which is even more fundamental than all other duties. And therefore, in the conversation between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Ramananda Raya, when Ramananda Raya suggests that the ultimate perfection of life is to follow Varnashrama Dharma, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, no, go further. Please explain even more. I want to hear, this is not the ultimate perfection. And especially because in this age of Kali Yuga, it is very difficult to recognize the proper Varna and Ashrama system. It's even more difficult to follow absolutely this process of an Ashrama system. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has made things easy for us by giving a prescribed method to follow the Bhagavad Dharma, which is the essence, which is the real Dharma which of intrinsic duty of every living entity towards the Supreme Lord. And by following this Dharma, one gets the highest benefit, the highest ROI, return of investment, return of occupational duty. So until unless one does not engage in this highest duty, all other duties eventually will lead one towards dissatisfaction, towards incompleteness, and some sort of a defeat in the fight against struggle for existence. But as we know that if one follows Dharma, Dharma protects one. So it is important that we recognize that if we want to really win against this struggle for existence, we need to take to the Dharma as instructed by Lord Shri Krishna in Bhagavad Gita and in Srimad Bhagavatam. By following in these footsteps, as we also see in the end of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. If one simply follows the instructions of the Supreme Lord in complete surrenderance, he takes care of all the sinful reactions and he gives complete assurance. So, if we want to find the true spiritual life, following Dharma is intrinsic, essential, and cannot be avoided. And by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we can have a practical method of chanting, reading, and following for regulative principles, attending the morning program. If one does this, one is sure to attain the highest perfection of life. With this, I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. Akhilesh, Kushi, any comments? Should I?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Kushi.
Hare Krishna, Kushi.
Yeah, I had a question. So regarding, we covered the many different kind of conceptions of Dharma that people have. Regarding the four regulative principles, are there any other sort of principles like that from the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita that also kind of give us, like a very practical way of what we should do and what we should not do?
So in what context do you mean practical?
Yeah, practical, I mean like the four regulative principles, instructs us not to eat meat and things like that. So basically rules like, that you would use to teach a child, like if you had a child, how you would teach a child what to do, what not to do, in that kind of practical. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah. So basically, there are many do's and don'ts, but the most fundamental of them is these four things: no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, and no illicit sex. Because these four principles kills our propensity towards self-realization. They make it difficult for one to hear this spiritual subject matter. It takes away one's interest. The sinful activities makes one more and more materially entangled. And these principles are very much mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, and Srila Prabhupada is using references of this text to ascertain these principles. And the positive principle of chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the easiest cleansing process. Our consciousness, which is influenced by material modes of nature, cannot recognize or see the spiritual nature very clearly. So we require a certain spiritual process, and the spiritual process is to chant and hear. But to hear properly, we should have a certain amount of purity, certain amount of certain things which favor this process of hearing. And not following this four regulative principle is like resulting in reduction in our ability to hear attentively what we are chanting. And also it takes away our interest from appreciating the spiritual message of Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. So basically, it is very simplified. Only four regulative principles. These are primary. And then on top of that, there are other principles like taking Krishna Prasadam. This is a very, very important principle. If one takes Krishna Prasadam, naturally one's tongue gets controlled. The tongue, which is hankering for many, so as we saw, life's desire should not be meant for sense gratification. The biggest beginning of sense gratification starts from the tongue. The uncontrolled tongue results in many other further sense enjoyments. So Srila Prabhupada has introduced Krishna Prasadam all over ISKCON temples, and devotees, they offer food to the Lord, and when they partake that prasadam, the soul gets nourished, and one's tendencies towards sense gratification gradually vanishes. And this is another important principle which is further helpful in one's devotional service or one's progress in spiritual life towards the ultimate dharma. And also engaging the service towards the movement in whatever capacity we can serve the Lord physically, because our senses, when they are not engaged in spiritual activity or spiritual dharma, they are naturally engaged in some material activity, some material service. So either we are doing spiritual dharma or we are doing material dharma. So in order to facilitate our natural tendencies or inclinations, this institution of ISKCON has been established by Srila Prabhupada so that our natural proclivities can be dovetailed in the service of the Lord. And even that is another powerful way to come from the influence of lower modes and elevate ourselves towards spiritual consciousness or towards the mode of goodness. So these are some other principles, and then Srila Prabhupada also instructs us devotees to get up in the morning and attend the Mangalarti, the morning program, which is another very important principle which helps devotees to raise their consciousness from the lower modes of passion and ignorance. So there are few other instructions like this, but the fundamental instructions are these four regulative principles: take Krishna Prasadam, chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra. If one chants and hears Hare Krishna Mahamantra, then and follows these four regulative principles in the beginning, then all other principles will follow, because very soon one will realize that I want to make further progress. I want to experience this joyous life even more and more. And then naturally one will also take up other finer principles which support devotional life. Does that help, Kushi?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu.
So I always had this question. So when you say the four regulatory principles, is the numbering 1, 2, 3, 4 indicative of the ordering, like any priority ordering, or they're just four regulatory principles as such?
No, they're just four regulatory principles. All are important. Not that one can give a priority to one and nothing like that. They are like four pillars. So you break any one of them, it's not correct. So the crux is to recognize that there is a Yuga Dharma, there is ultimate duty, that is our spiritual duty that needs to be performed, and that is clearly defined by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And if one performs that Yuga Dharma, then one attains the highest perfection of life. That is intrinsic, that is not a concocted understanding, no. And anyone who does sincerely can see the results very soon, because as you go close to the fire, you will immediately feel warmth. Similarly, if you go closer, and in the sense if one starts chanting and hearing attentively in a disciplined manner, one will see that one is purifying one's heart, one's consciousness, and one's intellect, and one is seeing there is a pure spiritual joy. So this most important takeaway I would like to say is to take to this Yuga Dharma, which is very, very intrinsic, very simple, but so sublime, and that brings one to the perfection of life. Any other questions or comments, Shri Prabhu?
No, Prabhu.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, today it is crystal clear that what is the dharma of ours, like why we took birth here, and what actually we have to do. So this is crystal clear, Prabhu, today. Absolutely. there is no.
Devotees are also happy hearing this. Thank you.
Because life after life, we have been associating with the materials, and we are this, that, we have to do this, we have to do that. No, now today it is absolutely clear, Prabhu. And chanting also, we have to do attentively. And because I also have experienced that if I am doing attentive chanting, means whatever work I have to do, that work will be in the right way. If I don't do the attentive chanting, then it is then actually I am also not feeling satisfied while chanting. So,
thank you for sharing your feedback. Thank you all for joining for another day of understanding Dharma. I hope all of you could take some takeaways, and we will have few more wonderful sessions in the coming weeks. So please do join us. And beyond these classes, I request if you have any other questions, please write to us, any of the devotees, and stay in touch and take more benefit even during the other days. And thank you all for joining.